install and review video for a glow shift boost gauge. This is the tinted 7 color series. I'll give you a nice little product description and also include a link to where I purchased it, but we might as well dive into it. So right off the bat, I'm actually very surprised with the construction of it. This itself has kind of like a matte rubber finish. It comes with like a nice little lens cover too, and it feels solid. So I was a little bit worried about that being plastic or plasticky or cheap, although I'm impressed with this. Now this exact model, this is the not the digital model, this is the mechanical model. So what you're lacking with this is an actual boost or pressure sensor. So instead the boost line will actually run right into the back and attach onto this little prong thing right here. So I believe this comes with mounting hardware as well. Comes with a nice cover to make sure that it looks pretty good. This is a nice visor, I think, too. So the sun, you don't get any sun glare on there. And that we'll figure out later. It also comes with your 8-inch tubing, and this is what you're going to tap into your boost line with. So you should have a boost pressure sensor somewhere near the throttle body on your 2009 Saab 9.3. This is with the 2.0 liter engine, 2.0 liter turbo engine. So I'm going to tee in right onto that sensor line and just run this up through the firewall and underneath the steering column. And I'm eventually going to wire this into my air vent right to the left of the steering wheel. And then it also comes with some mounting hardware. I'm not sure if I'm going to be using that. I want a cleaner look. And then something else that it comes with is the 1/4-inch T, 1/8-inch T actually, I'm sorry. And that is 1/8-inch line as well. And that's the inside of the tubing. And then it also comes with 2 hose clamps and some just more hardware. The one thing that I'm concerned with is you're going to obviously need a hose clamp to connect the tube, this black tubing, to the boost gauge itself. Although I would recommend, after teeing in and splicing into your boost sensor pressure line, I would recommend putting additional hose clamps on these sides right here. Or zip ties, zip ties and duct tape pretty much solve everything. So that's the unboxing. I'm going to be doing a little bit more planning and figuring out exactly how I'm going to wire this up. I have a switchboard in my car and I would like to wire it to the switchboard so that way it turns on when I flip the switch. And we'll see how that goes. I'll be doing an install video along with this. Now, according to the directions for this glow shift boost gauge, you're supposed to have a red 12-volt switch, a yellow 12-volt constant, and an orange 12-volt headlamp. So basically, here's how this works. You have a constant power supply, which is the yellow. So the yellow is actually where this meter or where this gauge is getting its power from. The red 12-volt switch, that is supposed to make this this gauge turn on when your car turns on. So basically, at the fuse where this 12-volt switch is at, that just means if there is a 12-volt reading going to this gauge, or a voltage of 12 volts going to this gauge, that's basically going to indicate to this that it needs to turn the screen on. So that 12 volts is not powering at all, it's just acting as the indicator to whether this needs to be on or not. Now the orange works the same way. If 12 volts happens to be running from that cord through the orange wire and back into the gauge, then that means that your headlights are on and that this needs dimmed. Now, I'm going to be doing this a little differently because I have a built-in, well, custom-made switchboard. So the switchboard, I'm running the 12-volt power supply to, and it's currently not wired up right now. This is the ground, but the 12-volt power supply will be shared by all these switches. They're in parallel with each other, which should be okay for this application. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be running the 12-volt constant and the red 12-volt switch together. So both of those will be hooked up directly to the power supply. As for the orange dimming, I'm going to wire that to the second switch. So the first switch is going to be wired up for both the 12 volt constant yellow cord and the red 12 volt switch cord. So basically, when I turn that on, my gauge will turn on. That's already assuming that my car is turned on. Secondly, the next switch is going to be lined up for that orange 12 volt headlamp supply. So when I want to dim it, I can dim it on my own using that second switch, given that the first switch is already turned on. So to start this tutorial off, I'm going to just go over, I guess, power supply first. So this is a direct hookup to my battery. This is a 12 volt, and I'm running it along this, underneath this protective layer, and into the car. Now I'm actually wiring it right through this door jamb, and then this trim right here pulls directly back, and I have a little notch there, and then I'm running that live wire into here. Now this panel pulls off just by that little thing right there, that finger hole, and then that is going to be the power supply. So I plan on, after wiring up the power supply, installing it into this air vent. I've seen a lot of people that have done that before, where you actually hollow out an area and then slide it in flush. I think I really like that idea, and it doesn't seem to fit well in any of the other air vents, and it wouldn't be useful in that one, obviously. So we're gonna go ahead and stick her in here. I have a way of doing this, and this involves carefully taking a pair of pliers or something else that you have, grabbing it, and there's some solid spots. So up at the top, there's a solid spot here you can grab at, and then down at the bottom, I try to grab, let me get a better view. I try to grab it right along these. Now what you're gonna wanna do is just lightly pull it out with the pliers, and then go ahead and shove. I have a stack of old gift cards and credit card things that you can shove them in along these edges to hold out those clips, so you can remove the vent. So now the top is done, and I'm gonna go along that outside edge until this whole thing pops out. Okay, so I just pulled it out. This is something that's going to happen when you pull this out. There's a mechanism in here, and you need to make sure that you keep track of a couple small parts. For my application, it doesn't matter. I'm actually going to remove all of this mechanism in here, and this is to direct the airflow. Obviously, I'm not gonna have that capability with the boost gauge in there, but this is for any other application where you're taking this out and let's say you need it to be able to put back together. You're going to need to make sure you really hold on to these parts. This in particular, this is the spring that holds this entire assembly together. For my case, I'm going to hold on to them until I actually follow through with cutting this hole out. But that is the deal. This is the mechanism that is inside. For me, I'm actually going to be able to hollow this out, remove that back panel, and this is where I'm going to drill a hole into the bottom of this so I can feed my wire directly down through here, out of this, and back to the switchboard. Furthermore, I don't know if you can see all the way back in there, but that grommet that leads to the firewall is actually down there too. So this is where I'll be running my 1/8 inch boost line from the turbo to my gauge. Now I have too small of a drill bit to fit my boost line, so I'm just going to be moving this around in there to make that hole a little bit bigger. Don't want it to be crimping your boost line at all. And that should do it for the wires. Okay, so my gauge actually came with this nifty cover. Now this is a visor, so that way you can see it. I don't think it's going to look right sticking out of this, but what it is useful for is lining up where your gauge is going to fit. So keep in mind the inside diameter of this, because it fits around here, is the exact diameter of what you're going to need to hollow this out as. So what I'm going to do is lay it down in a spot that I like it, where I think it's kind of even and also has room on both sides to cut without messing with any of the wall and structure of this vent. And I think that's the spot. So what I'm going to do is end up holding this down and marking on the inside lines with Sharpie where I need to cut and remove material. Okay, so I have a variable temp soldering iron. I went ahead and put this thing at 400 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to just melt my way through these beams. I thought about clipping it with some wire snips or cutters, although I just don't want to crack anything. Figured I can try this first, and if it doesn't work, we'll go the other route. Although that's sinking right through, I'm thinking we'll have no problem with this. Okay, so it took a while to get this fit up. It took a lot of just trial and error, and then also just heating up edges to make it flush and sit tight. It's kind of neat. You can work with this plastic. I think it's ABS. You can work with it kind of like you're welding. So really, if you have a little bit of extra or scrap like that, you can end up melting it around edges to where it's a nice flush fit. So that's not really moving. Although I do have this back piece, so what I'm going to do is put it on in reverse in the back, and it's just going to act as an additional attachment piece if it fits. And it does perfectly. So I went ahead and slid that on in the back, made sure it's tight. So now it's got a locking mechanism and it's going to stay in there. So the red and yellow wires are wired together. Basically, the yellow is your 12-volt constant. This is your 12-volt ignition switch wire. So essentially, since this is going to be controlled through my switchboard, these can be wired together. This is going to go to a constant 12-volt power supply. So when I flip the first toggle switch, these are going to turn on. The next one is going to be wired up to the second toggle switch using a 12-volt power supply. And when I flip that switch, it'll just indicate that I want it to be dimmed, and it'll dim down. And then the black, the final one, oops. Oh, the wires are strong. This was obviously going to just go to the ground. Next subject matter is figuring out where we're going to attach this boost line. Now the instruction manual gives you a couple different options. You can attach to this line that comes off of your internal wastegate, and then back into, this is the intake turbo manifold. I don't know what you exactly call this thing. And then you can tee in there. But it also tells you down on step 4 that, or step 3 rather, there's usually a line coming out of the intake manifold. So for the Saab 2009 Saab 93, let me get my work bag out of the way. You have this cover on here. You can go ahead and remove this cover. There's just 3 star bolts. And then if you look next to your throttle body, which this assembly here is your throttle body, this is your TPS, I think. Right here, you have an additional line. Now this line runs all the way down to, this is right after your intercooler. You have a line that comes up here and then into your throttle body. And then you also have a pressure sensor right here. So this line runs all the way up and into this sensor attached to your throttle body. So I'm gonna go ahead and splice right into this and run that wire carefully along this edge and then back into the grommet, which is underneath the master cylinder down there. So I'm going to make my cut over here, just so that way it's easier to tee off right in this region and run it directly back. So here we go. I'm going to be using this T fitting that came with the kit, and this is an 1/8 inch, by the way, and also 1/8 inch line. Now it doesn't come with any hose clamps, but I'm not running anything extraordinary boost wise, so I'm thinking it's not going to blow off, mainly because it's also got these grooves on it to lock that tube into place. But if it does, you can get hose clamps at AutoZone for very cheap, and that's something we can do down the road. Now that the fitting is on, I'm going to go through with finding that rubber grommet and feeding the boost line in from this vent hole down through there and through the grommet into the engine bay, and then reattaching to that fitting. Okay, so we went with this exposed hole right to the left. It actually wasn't exposed. I had we're sitting up there covering it, but there's another grommet right to the left of your steering column, and that was much easier to access with the drill. And I drilled right through and now have this wire coming out. So where you're gonna find it is approximately right down there. So that's underneath your master cylinder. You can reach your hand in through here and pull that line through. And I think that's as far as it goes. So now we're lined up. So the ground wire's off, and I am now going to run the power wire, the active one, back to where that ground originally was to give power to all of these. And then from there, I'm going to wire up the yellow and the red to this switch, so that way when I turn that on, the gauge will come on. And then the orange wire is going to this one to dim it whenever that goes on. And then both of those, the grounds following that, will run all the way back to this over here. So all of them will be grounded in the same place, and they'll receive these power through the switches. Okay, for the sake of a test run, I'm going to just hold that there. This is the ground. And now you're viewing, oops. Hold the ground. Here's my gauge. And then finally on and dim. Just like that. So now that I know that this is good to go, I'm going to solder all my connections and go ahead with the install. Okay, all wires are fed. I'm going to go ahead and continue with pushing this in. Make sure the gauge is straight and all lines are free. Oh, good thing I checked. My boost line was caught up around one of the flanges. And she's in. Okay, all ends are soldered. Switchboard's going to sit up there. I have the majority of the wires tucked. I also marked which cord comes from the red and the yellow. This one comes from the orange. Just for later reference, since I taped them all together and you're not going to be able to see the colors after it's tucked, I'm going to go ahead and remove this old ground wire, and then this is the ground wire from the previous, and I'm going to mount that up right there, and then we can call it a day. Okay, and one final test. Turn the car on. Switch 1 works. Switch 2 dims it. And my color settings are there. I'm gonna make it red. There we go, now it matches. Okay, so on the last clip, you can see where I was having some troubles. The gauge would turn on, but it wasn't giving me absolutely any readings. Previously, I tapped in here, and then I also tried tapping in. This is from the inlet of the turbo housing back up to this boost controller. I tried tapping in here, and then again, I found this one. And this comes to another boost controller from my inlet or my intake manifold. I tried all three of them and I was still getting nothing. I let the car sit overnight and I was pretty stumped for that whole day. And then the next morning it worked. I don't know what changed, but this is where I have it connected to. So hopefully you don't experience the same issue, but this line will work. A fancy trick that I learned is if you pull it off while the car is idling, and you can put your finger over top of the hose and you'll be able to feel if there's vacuum coming through at idle. That's how you know if you're onto the right line. I need to do some cleaning up with this to make sure that it's not going to get snagged up or overheated, but as of right now she's working, so I think we're going to finish the video up with that.